back when bell-bottoms were cool and the coolest cameras were anything about the Ricoh 500G.
A classic. And you picked a good one. This camera's had a fascinating history.
Yeah. All right, everybody. You ready to rewind time and dive into the world of vintage cameras?
Let's do it. I'm excited for this one.
Me too. Today, we're going back to 1972, back when bell-bottoms were cool and the coolest cameras were anything but bulky. We're talking about the Ricoh 500G.
A classic. And you picked a good one. This camera's had a fascinating history.
Yeah, it really stood out to me for this deep dive. For starters, this wasn't some rare limited edition camera that only the wealthy collectors could get their hands on. This was your everyday point and shoot, built to last kind of camera.
Absolutely. Accessible, dependable, a real workhorse, which is, what you want in a camera.
Exactly. So for our listeners who haven't had the pleasure of holding a 500G, can you paint us a picture of this vintage charmer? What are we looking at here?
Well, the first thing you'll notice is its size. We're talking compact, almost unbelievably so by today's standards. Think pocket-sized, a far cry from the DSLRs we lug around today.
Oh yeah, the product description mentioned compact design, but I wasn't prepared for just how compact it really is. It's amazing. I mean, seriously, can you imagine slipping your camera into your pocket these days? No more sore backs after a day of shooting?
Right. It's all about portability back then. Like I said, a workhorse, they wanted something you could take everywhere, and it really reflected the photography style of the time, too.
Which was?
Street photography. The early 70s was all about capturing those candid moments in the city, those fleeting slices of life. You needed a camera that was discreet, almost invisible. The 500G fit the bill perfectly.
It's like it was made for capturing those genuine moments. Okay, so it's compact, it's discreet, but what about the lens? Our notes mention a 40mm lens. Now, I got to be honest, I'm used to the versatility of zoom lenses. How did photographers adapt to this seemingly limiting fixed lens?
It's not limiting at all, actually. It just encourages a different approach. See, that 40mm, it's like the sweet spot for a lot of photography. Wide enough to capture context, but not so wide that it distorts perspective. Perfect for street photography, portraits, even landscapes if you know how to work it.
So instead of relying on a zoom, you have to physically move closer to your subject.
Exactly. And that changes everything. It's more immersive, more intentional. You're not detached. You're part of the scene. Finding those interesting angles, those unique perspectives.
That's so cool. It forces you to think differently about composition, about how you frame your shot. I love that.
Right. And the results speak for themselves. The images you get have this intimacy, this immediacy that you just don't get from zooming in from afar.
I can see how that would really appeal to photographers who want to connect with their subjects on a deeper level. Okay, let's move on to the more technical stuff. This is where I usually start to feel a little lost.
But the technical stuff is often the most interesting, though.
Well, maybe you can shed some light on it then. We're talking about the Copal leaf shutter, right?
We are. Now, for anyone who's grown up with digital cameras, the idea of a mechanical shutter might seem a bit, archaic.
Yeah, a little intimidating. Like, what happens if it breaks?
Well, there's always that risk. But you know what? These shutters were built to last. Copal shutters are legendary in the film photography world. Reliable, precise.
I mean, if they're still clicking after all these years, they must be doing something right.
Exactly. But it's more than just reliability. It's about the experience. Every time you press the shutter button on a camera like the 500G, you hear this satisfying, crisp click.
I know exactly what you mean. It's like the camera is telling you, yeah, we got it, you made a photograph.
Precisely. It's tactile, it's engaging, it's a reminder that you're doing something deliberate, something real.
There's just something so satisfying about that. You don't get that with a digital camera. It's all silent and instant.
You lose that connection to the craft, that physicality, that sense of anticipation.
And control.
Absolutely. With the 500G, you're not just letting the camera do all the thinking for you. You're choosing your settings. You're metering the light.
Hold on. Metering the light? The 500G has a built-in light meter.
It does. Surprise.
A little. I just assumed that for a camera from the 70s, you'd need a separate light meter. But this changes everything.
It's a game changer, for sure, especially for beginners.
Right. It takes so much of the guesswork out of shooting film. You don't have to worry about overexposing or underexposing your shots, and it lets you experiment more freely with different film stocks, push the boundaries of your creativity.
It's amazing how much they packed into this seemingly simple camera. And speaking of pushing boundaries, we can't forget the hot shoe.
Oh yeah, the hot shoe. For those who aren't familiar with the term, it's basically a little connector on top of the camera that lets you attach an external flash. So even though it's a simple camera at its core, it's still got tricks up its sleeve for more advanced users. You could get really creative with it.
Absolutely. It opens up a whole world of possibilities for low-light photography, for creating dramatic lighting effects.
I bet wedding photographers back in the day swore by this camera. And before we move on, can we talk about the self-timer? I mean, come on, this was like decades before selfies were even a thing.
Ahead of its time, right? It just shows that this camera wasn't just about practicality, it was about having fun, too.
Exactly. Group photos, self-portraits, getting creative with long exposures. The possibilities are endless. It just adds to its charm. Okay, so we've covered the design, the features, but let's talk about the bigger picture for a moment. In a world that's now dominated by digital cameras, smartphones that take amazing photos, why would anyone even consider shooting with a Ricoh 500G today? What's the appeal?
It's a fantastic question. I think for many, it's about rediscovering the joy of a slower, more deliberate approach to photography.
Okay.
Think about it. With digital, it's all about instant gratification. Snap, snap, snap. Check the screen. Delete, repeat. There's a million filters and editing tools at your disposal, encouraging you to create the most perfect, idealized image.
Which, don't get me wrong, has its place. But I can see how that could take away from the artistry of it all.
Exactly. With a camera like the 500G, it's a different story. You're forced to slow down, be present, thinking about your composition, your exposure. You only have a limited number of shots on a roll of film, so each one matters.
It's less about capturing the perfect moment and more about embracing the moment as it is.
And the beauty of the imperfections, too. The light leaks, the grain, those happy accidents, those are all part of the magic of film. They add a certain character, a soul to the images that's difficult to replicate digitally.
So it's not just about nostalgia.
Nostalgia plays a part, sure, but it's more than that. It's a different philosophy, a different way of seeing the world. It's about appreciating the process, the tangible connection to the craft.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? In a world obsessed with the newest, the fastest, the most high-tech, could returning to something like the Ricoh 500G actually be the key to rediscovering our passion for photography? Something to think about.